So the Chiefs got some very interesting news about a timeline to return for one of the most important players on defense, at least early on in the season, that sadly went to IR due to injury. And this update would be massive news for the Chiefs defense at the perfect time if it happens. So I've got to talk about that, a couple roster moves made today, as well as expose those calling the Chiefs frauds. But first, how about those? All right, first up, the Chiefs trading away Sneed continues to look a little better each and every week. Sure, it would have been awesome to be able to somehow afford both Sneed and Chris Jones, but you can't pay them all, so KC opted to sign the CEO of Sack Nation to a 5-year deal that included $95 million guaranteed, and then after franchise tagging Sneed, they traded him to the Titans for a 2025 third-round pick and a swap of 2024 seventh-round picks. Well, the Titans have been pretty bad, to say the least, this year, and currently have the second overall pick, which also means every pick that they possess is a very early pick in that round, and that means the third-round pick that the Chiefs got in exchange for Sneed right now is the 66th pick in the NFL draft. In previous years, KC has drafted players like safety Juan Thornhill, linebacker Willie Gay Jr., center Creed Humphries, safety Brian Cook, and Kingsley Suamataia, right around that 65-ish draft pick range. So a lot of these have been hits. Again, not all of them yet, but every draft is different, so we shall see what ends up happening. Either way, this is a big get for KC in exchange for Sneed. So as of right now, the Chiefs have picked 32, 64, 68, 96, 133, and 255. And just look at those two third-round picks in particular. There's a pretty big difference between pick 68 and 96, yet it's still in the same round. So well done, Brett Veach, is all I can really say about that. Now, another reason why I believe the Chiefs opted to trade Sneed is because I really do think that Trent McDuffie is not only one of the best corners in the NFL, but he could very well be the first defensive back that the Chiefs have drafted and chose to sign to a long-term second contract since Eric Berry. McDuffie is the third highest graded defender on the team from a season-long grade per PFF. Then he's one of the best in preventing separation in the entire NFL, almost on an island of his own. If you look at this chart here, zoom into the top right, boom, McDuffie Island. And if you actually dig into the numbers, he is technically the top corner in lockdown percentage, doing so 66.67% of the time. And I know he's not a ball hawk, he's a little bit smaller, so he doesn't often come down with INTs, even though he's had 2 this year in the last 3 games. But did you know he also has 7 career forced fumbles? One was just last week, so he's had 3 turnovers in a row, 2 INTs and 1 forced fumble. But get this, those 7 forced fumbles in 3 years has him tied for second all time in a cornerback's first 3 seasons in the league. He's actually first among all active corners over the last 3 as well. And because of all of his forced fumbles, that actually has McDuffie tied for 5th with 9 turnovers out of all defensive backs drafted in 2022. Basically, this man locks them up, shuts them down, and makes plays. What more could you really want out of your cornerback one? I mean, the conversation about how much you're going to pay him, how long of a contract, and if they will actually do it or not is for another day, of course. But speaking of cornerbacks, there's a potential chance of Jaylen Watson returning at some point here down the stretch, said Andy Reid today in his presser with the media, at least. He didn't make it seem like he was super confident about a return. He actually said his return would be stretching it, which I took to mean the chance of his return being rather unlikely. Jaylen Watson did post some footage of him late last week running some sprints, which is a great sign in his rehab progression, but the next step to see is how does he handle moving laterally, shifting left to right, because that's going to be the key thing needed for him to be back out there on the field and return to play. Dr. Jesse Morse of Injury Experts thinks Watson could find himself back in the next 2 to 3 weeks, and maybe there is a chance his 21-day practice window to return opens up at some point in the playoffs, even if the chance of his return is actually minor. But if he's able to return to play, I can't imagine it being any earlier than the conference championship, maybe the Super Bowl. Either way, it would be awesome to have him back out there. The reason why is because the defense was clearly better with Watson out there as cornerback 2, and there are several metrics to back this up, but here's just one. The defense was top 10 in EPA per play before Watson went down due to injury week 8, then eventually fell all the way down to 28th. That's bottom 5. They've bounced back a little bit since then, but the only major difference was the absence of Jaylen Watson. Now, the return of Charles Omenihu is helpful from a pass rush perspective, and that does put less pressure on the secondary at times, but even if the Chiefs could just get Jaylen Watson back for 1, maybe 2 games, AFC Championship, Super Bowl. The boost it could be for the defense would be massive and would definitely help out the chances of a three-peat. Of course, that's if Watson bounces back that quickly from injury, surgery, rehab, all that, and looks his normal self out there on the field. That's a tough ask, but it is not impossible based on what Andy Reid said today. Then there's also the idea that Steven Nelson gets elevated to try and fill the void left behind by Watson. We don't really know what he has left in the tank, but we should see him get some real live reps here on Sunday against the Broncos, because that's really the only way to see what he has left. So if Jaylen Watson is an answer maybe later down the road, Steven Nelson could help fill the void. All right, real quick, I want to shout out a couple ways you can support the channel. You can get some HBTC coffee of Benchwarmer Brew. This has got origin notes of Mexico and Ethiopia, a smooth medium roast, and it is one of the most popular blends of the lineup. Then you can also snag some HBTC merch. We've got Dad Bod Season, X Factor in honor of Dante Hall, mixed with Xavier Worthy, of course, and much more. Links to both the coffee and merch are in the description down below. Next up, before I get to some roster moves the Chiefs made today, as well as a look at the playoff picture as things stand heading into the last week of the regular season, I do want to shut down the notion that the Chiefs are a fraudulent football team. It's something that's been circulating the media for clicks and views because they are poor, impoverished little peasants, with one of the most recent being that the Chiefs are only one of 4 teams that have not scored more than 30 points in a game, and they are using that to take a dig at the Chiefs and their offense. Well, the Chiefs are obviously the only team with a winning record on this list, but that's because you have to play complementary football. Both sides of the ball, even some good special teams, in order to win games. The Chiefs are scoring an average of 24.1 points per game on offense and allow just 18 points per game on defense. The defense also has allowed 20 or fewer points 12 times this season, which is the most times this has been done by a defense in the entire league. I will say, though, part of the reason why that is for the Chiefs defense is actually because of the offense's ability to sustain long drives, and also they rarely turn the ball over, at least over the last 6 or 7 games. Look at this, though. KC has the 4th longest average time of possession and average the most offensive plays per game with 66.1. Then they have 39 drives this year that go 10 or more plays and end in points, with the Commanders and Eagles being second with 29 drives, at least as of last week when I did this research. They also have the most 10-plus play drives that end in touchdowns with 21. Combine that with the fact that KC is the best offense in the NFL at converting on 3rd down, plus their lack of creating explosive plays, and that's what you get, an offense that will grind down opposing defenses and more times than not help out their own defense by doing so. The offense has also scored 26 or more points in 9 games this year and are coming off of back-to-back games of 27 or more scored against playoff teams. Andy Reid gets conservative late in games as well, often opting to have players slide down short of the goal line and kneel the game out, like the Texans game, rather than a garbage time touchdown to run up the score and stat pad. Basically, the Chiefs are doing just fine, even if they aren't blowing teams out, even though they just won a game by 19 points. And yeah, they also aren't putting up a lot of 30-plus points in these games. That's fine. At the end of the day, you're looking to win, and nobody knows how to do that more than the Kansas City Chiefs. That's why they are 6-1 against current playoff teams, locked up the 1 seed on Christmas, can rest their starters this week, get a first-round bye, and home field advantage throughout the playoffs. This isn't luck. This isn't fraudulent. This isn't fake. This isn't the refs, you little cry asses. This is the definition of greatness. Now, on the subject of resting starters, it's being reported that Andy Reid will opt to rest key starters for their Week 18 matchup against the Denver Broncos, which is taking place at Mile High Stadium on Sunday, January 5th at 3:25 p.m. Central. Andy Reid said today that he's not yet sure who will and who will not play as far as key starters are concerned, but for what it's worth, here's who the Chiefs made inactive last year, Week 18. Rashee Rice, Patrick Mahomes, Kadarius Toney, L'Jarius Sneed, Mike Dana, Donovan Smith, and Travis Kelce. Well, I would anticipate Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Chris Jones, maybe Trent McDuffie, and also Nick Bolton all rest up, though of course there will be even more, and I could be wrong about a couple of them. One guy I am hoping to see out there is left tackle DJ Humphries, if his hamstring will allow him to. He needs real reps to obviously test the hamstring and knock off more rust. That's the only way to see if the team can kick Joe Thuney back inside the left guard or not. Thuney has done a great job at the left tackle spot over the last few games, and if Humphries doesn't play Week 18, I don't see how or why they change that up, and Humphries might even find himself as a use in case of emergency tackle for the playoffs. However, The run game, in my opinion, has suffered a bit with Joe Thuney not inside where he is excellent, and therefore the ideal scenario is probably Humphries looking pretty good out there this Sunday in the starting five for the divisional round against whoever, being DJ Humphries, Joe Thuney, Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, and Jawan Taylor rounding out that right side. Of course, the game could also be good for Kingsley Suamataia to get some reps after Humphries as well. I don't know that he needs to play the entire game, just needs to look pretty good for part of it and that hamstring hold up. And then, of course, Wanya Morris could maybe get some reps at the right tackle spot, unless they hold him out simply to let his knee rest up. Andy Reid did share today that DJ Humphries is doing well in his recovery and rehab, but he can't yet make any promises about Week 18 until he gets DJ out there at practice this week to see what he can do. He then said he will play the left tackle situation by ear as the week goes on. I mean, that's a typical Andy Reid answer, but he said Thuney and Caliendo have done a nice job, yet he's also curious to see where DJ Humphries is at. Then he will evaluate as they go down the stretch and get ready for this playoff run. Now, I'll talk more about players that could use the reps in a later video this week, but I will say this is a must-win game for the Denver Broncos. If the Broncos win this one, they are in the playoffs because they fell short last week in overtime against the Cincinnati Bengals. It was a weird series of events at the end. Denver scored with 8 seconds left on the clock, an incredible throw off the back foot by Bo Nix. And then they kicked an extra point to tie it up rather than attempt to go for 2 and win it all. And they headed to overtime. Well, then the Broncos offense proceeded to go 3 and out twice in OT. The first time was after Cincinnati punted, and the second was after the Bengals missed a field goal, hit the left upright, and that then allowed Joe Burrow and company to drive down the field and score. Then, believe it or not, Cincinnati finds themselves in a pretty weird place because they are actually going to need to, probably reluctantly, but they are going to need to be cheering for the Carson Wentz-led Chiefs to win this game if they want a shot at the playoffs. Because if the Chiefs manage to beat Denver's starters, then the Jets beat the Dolphins, and finally Cincinnati beats the Steelers, the Bengals will be able to sneak in as the 7th seed rather than the Broncos. But again, if the Broncos win, they're guaranteed in. If they lose, though, Cincinnati needs to lose to the Steelers and the Dolphins need to lose to the Jets in order for Denver to remain the 7th seed. Where things get even more interesting is that if the Broncos somehow lose, Miami can get in with a win over the Jets, and even if Cincy beats the Steelers, it doesn't matter. All in all, this week is going to be very interesting to see how it all plays out. That then begs the question, who would you guys rather see in there as the 7th seed? The Broncos, the Bengals, or the Dolphins? Well, let's just throw the Dolphins out of the equation right now because, of course, everybody would pick them. It's an uphill battle either way for Miami because it's still unclear if Tua is even going to be able to play this week. And the reason why it kind of matters who it is because the 7th seed is going to play Buffalo. That's the 2nd seed in the wild card round. And if the 7th seed somehow manages to beat the Bills, the Chiefs are going to play whoever that 7th seed is. So I think the Bengals are the more serious threat to the Bills over the Broncos, at least with how they match up against them. So I would personally prefer the Broncos getting in, but would be curious to read your thoughts in the comments down below. Would you somehow rather see the Bengals sneak in there so they potentially knock the Bills out in the wild card round and then have to play Cincy at Arrowhead for the divisional? Or how would you prefer to see all that play out? Before I get to the next segment, did you guys know that I have an NFL-wide news channel covering all things NFL outside of the Kansas City Chiefs? It's called Cole Breaks the Huddle, and I do a very poor job of letting you guys know that I run a second channel where we drop multiple videos a week covering big picture NFL news. So if you enjoy my style of content with the editing, the pacing, and all that, but want to hear it from an NFL-wide perspective, this is the channel for you. Link is in the description down below. And then we have a couple roster moves the Chiefs made today worth talking about. First, they signed linebacker Blake Lynch to the practice squad, and in order to make room for him, they opted to terminate the practice squad contract of wide receiver Montrell Washington. Linebacker Jack Cochran was placed on IR last week after breaking his ankle, so I see this simply as a depth piece in case of emergency at the linebacker position. Blake Lynch was a UDFA following the 2020 NFL Draft, signing with the Vikings and playing with them for a couple of seasons. 2021 was definitely his standout year in which he started 6 games and racked up 35 combined tackles, but since then, he's kind of bounced around with a bunch of teams. Cardinals, Seahawks, Chargers twice, and most recently he was on the Raiders practice squad until he was released by them back in November. Now for Montrell Washington, the wide receiver returner that the Chiefs have had around for a couple seasons. It's tough to see him go, but obviously part of the business of the NFL. Plus, Nico Remigio has been looking pretty nice in his recent games. And then I would also take Montrell getting let go to mean the possibility of a Mecole Hardman return is also on the table. If that's the case, you really don't need 3 wide receivers around to be your potential returner. Nico will be the guy for now, and maybe we see Mecole return here sometime before or during the playoffs, or at least have his 21-day window to return open up. Now, in case you were wondering, Andy did confirm today that both Skyy Moore and Rashee Rice will not have a chance to return based on their injuries, which I feel like most of us already knew, but since he confirmed it, there you go. Rashee Rice will return at some point during the 2025 NFL season once he presumably serves whatever suspension the NFL will hand out to start the year. Then Skyy Moore could very well be done playing for the Chiefs entirely, even though he does have a year left on his rookie contract. However, that's a conversation for another day, but make sure to let me know your thoughts on the playoff picture as things stand right now, as well as early thoughts on this Week 18 game against the Broncos and how it could look without key starters, who should get playing time and who should rest. Let me know either way in the comments down below, and until next time, let's go. Let's freaking go. How about those?